Hello and welcome to the first episode of Brace for Impact, the podcast where we champion modern philanthropy in a changing world. Here, a bold collective of social entrepreneurs, visionary philanthropists, business leaders and experts will share new ways of solving our society's problems, ways that work. I'm Mary Rose Gunn, founder of The Four, the UK's only venture philanthropy fund dedicated to small charities. Most of us see the old top-down models for change are struggling to keep up. So I'm going to be shining a light on the change makers creating social impact on the ground. People who are brave and are doing things differently. Because ultimately, we are all working towards the same goal, to create a society that can solve its own problems. As my first guest, I am honoured to welcome one of the UK's most renowned leaders and philanthropists. With a highly successful 40-year career as a businessman, mentor and investor behind him, including setting up not one but two technology merchant banks. He was also the first British-born black man to be a director of a FTSE 100 company. And in 2016, he topped the Power List as the most influential person of Caribbean or African heritage in the UK. In 2010, he was awarded an OBE. 5 years later, the Queen appointed him Lord Lieutenant of Greater London. You may have spotted him sitting next to the Princess of Wales at the Jubilee celebrations. He has led a life of public service, serving on multiple boards, including the NHS Trust, the Peabody Trust, and chairing the Powerless Foundation and the Shaw Trust. He is also a founder of the social mobility charity, the Aletto Foundation. Perhaps not surprisingly, his motto for his family is do well, do good. I'm also very proud to say that he is a patron of The Four. Sir Ken Olisa OBE, Lord Lieutenant of Greater London, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm slightly embarrassed now. I blushed quietly.
Yeah, those questions were the intro was very thorough, I would like to think. I would love to start by asking you about your work as a philanthropist, and quite publicly you have made a huge donation for one thing in particular, where you managed to turn a £10 gift into a £2 million support package for your alma mater. I'd love you to tell us a bit about that and why you did it.
First of all, let's start with what is philanthropy, because there is a wide range of definitions. And actually, a chap called Mani Amadi, a very good man who's been around in the world of philanthropy for a very long time, advising companies and others on how to do good, he once said to me a very profound thing, which is that philanthropy is enlightened self-interest. And I stop with that point because it isn't about dodging taxes, it isn't about playing around with power, it's about getting a buzz out of doing good. And I'd say the first thing to all the people listening to your podcast series, if you don't get a buzz out of helping other people, philanthropy is not for you and you won't be a philanthropist. If, on the other hand, you do get a buzz out of it, there's so much opportunity to actually make a difference to the world, make it a better place, and obviously to get a thrill out of that activity. I discovered it a long, long time ago. Actually, I was at school. I joined, I have no idea why I joined it. I wasn't a sportsman at school or sports boy at school, and for some reason I joined the Old People's Welfare Committee, which in my school was the name for our sort of in-school charity. And we did things to help, quote, old people. Speaking now as an old person, I realise that they weren't particularly old, but that's not the point. And one of the earliest things we did was to go as a group of 4 or 5 boys to decorate the flat of a man who had all kinds of health problems, I think largely neurological, but health problems. We'd never done anything like this before. None of us, I don't think, had ever even painted a wall at home, never mind painted somebody's entire apartment. And we went there, and this poor bloke whose name was Frank, I'll never forget this, was in our way. So I remember we kept pushing him out of the way as we were painting and moving and slopping around and learning how to paint and decorate. And we transformed a dark, gloomy flat into a, well, I'd like to think anyway, rather attractive one, lots of white walls and so on. And then we went. And about 3 weeks later, I'd obviously forgotten all about it. I was walking down a long road to get the bus to go to school, and Frank was coming towards me on the same side of the road. And I thought, oh, God, he's a nutter. I didn't want anything to do with this bloke. I mean, that's a long time. It's 3 weeks ago. So I crossed over the other side of the road, as did he. And he approached me, and I remember being really rather full of trepidation, and he hugged me. And he said, thank you for what you did to my flat. And that hug was the first trigger I remember of the buzz I speak about that one gets when helping other people. So I think philanthropy is precisely, it's in the Greek word anyway, but I think philanthropy is precisely that, looking for the buzz to make the world a better place.
That's such a lovely way of putting it. So I'd love to hear more about how you turned that £10 gift into a huge support for your alma mater.
I went up to university, first term, most exciting time of my life. No longer, I'd been working for 9 months in a gap year, so school, and then suddenly, bam, I've got the freedom of being at university, and I drank as deep of that as I possibly could. And at the end of the first term, I hitchhiked back home I was at Cambridge, back to Nottingham, which took much of the morning. I picked up the car that a friend and I had shared. I wasn't allowed one at university, so he had it in term, I had it out of term. Drove all the way back to Cambridge, loaded everything I owned into the back of his car, then drove all the way home. And by this time, I was quite tired at the beginning of that story, and at the beginning of that experience. By the time I got home, I was entirely exhausted. My mother, whom I hadn't seen for 8 weeks, was delighted to see me. I was delighted to see her, but not for very long, because she said, let me help you empty the car. And I said, no, I'll do it in the morning. And she said, no, you can't. Around here, you can't trust people. They'll probably break in and steal things. I said, that's the trouble with you. You don't get on with people because you just always think the worst of them. Go to bed, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, draw back the curtains, car has gone. So 10 out of 10 to my late mother, of course, on that one yet again, another score for her. Panic. I assume that John, with whom I was sharing it, had come and taken it. So I run to John's house. He's still in bed. He hasn't taken it. I then have to go to the police station, report it as stolen. It turned up at the end of the week actually, the car was okay. It was such a wreck. There was no interest in anybody. But they'd take everything I owned, because everything I owned had been in the car, except, this is probably too much information, but my textbooks, my underwear, and a shoe.
Just one shoe.
Just one shoe. So that was it. So I had all my school clothes at home that obviously I didn't wear anymore, and a couple of the work clothes I hadn't taken to university, and that was it. I had no money, and my mum had no money, and so on. And I walked into town, which that's not as bad as that sounds. It wasn't a 20-mile walk or anything, but it was a mile or two. And I went to this boutique that I used to buy my clothes in those 9 months when I was working. And the shop assistant asked what I was looking for, and I was looking for a suit because I needed to go for an interview for a scholarship when I got back to university. And she showed me all the suits, and she's saying, and they're all outrageously expensive. And I haven't got any money anyway, so they're all by definition. And she said, what would I want the suit for? And I told her, and I poured out the story about having everything stolen. And she got the manager, who turned out to be the owner, to come and talk to me. And he got me to tell him the story, and then he gave me an enormous discount on the suit and a job for the Christmas holiday. So I earned the money to buy the suit and other things, including present for my mother, and then went back to Cambridge. By the time I went back to Cambridge, I'd forgotten all of that. I mean, life had moved on. So much else had happened in that time. And I was with my tutor just before going to dinner, and he's doing the how was your vacation? And I ramble on about various things that I'd done. And as we got up to go down to dinner, he said, well, I'm so glad nothing untoward happened. And I said, well, actually, I did forget to say that actually I did have everything I owned stolen. Everything stopped. He made me sit down again. He got me to explain what had happened. And then he asked me how I was going to cope for the next term. Now, this was 1972. Asked how you're going to cope means what are you going to do for money? And we didn't talk about money in those days, ever. I mean, it was really a disgusting subject. So I knew what he was asking, and I said, I'm fine. And he said, well, but, what about how are you going to cope with textbooks? I said, oh, no problem. They didn't take my textbooks. I've still got them. And as a natural scientist, I've got the 3 books I'm going to need for the 3 years, so it really doesn't matter. And he said, and anything else? And I said, no, it's fine. It's really, let's go to dinner. And he said, I'm going to ask you a question. So I remember being on guard, and he said, I know you said you weren't going to buy any textbooks, but if you were going to buy some textbooks this term, how much would you have spent on them rounded up to the nearest £10? Now that's a Cambridge interview question, because 0 rounded up to the nearest 10 is 10, obviously. So I said, well, 10. He said, just a moment. And he made a phone call, put the phone down and said, tomorrow if you go to the college office, there'll be a cheque for £10 for you. I know. He said, I know you don't need to buy any textbooks. It won't be for textbooks. It's for you to get through the next few weeks. So that was an enormous act of thoughtfulness and generosity and so on. Of course, it meant I survived for the rest of that term, not just on the £10, but until the grant came, etc. And so I'm rather proud that many, many years later, my wife and I gave the money to the college to endow the library. And when I told that story to all the fellows, And I said, and so, ladies and gentlemen, the £10 that you generously gave me all those years ago have now turned into 2 million. Their jaws all dropped. And I thought, well, they haven't even been listening to my story. I hope you have.
And with that incredible act of generosity, what was your motivation for doing it? Obviously, from a personal perspective and giving back to, but from your family perspective, why did you feel it was really important to do something so public?
So it was a big thank you, first of all, but it was a family gift. It wasn't just Ken. So it was the family recognising that our position in society is in large part due to that success I had. So it's a big thank you. It is a sign of gratitude. But I mentioned before the buzz, and I'm afraid there's another long story coming, but I had to go to a dinner in the city of London not very long ago. I mean, maybe 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I was late, and it was a really important dinner, and I shouldn't have been late for it. And I spent too long messing about in my office. And I come downstairs from the office to get in a cab, and there are no cabs because it's raining. So I'm not just late, I'm now going to be really late, and I can't blame anybody. So I'm standing, holding my luggage, my baggage from the day, my briefcase, my suitcase, everything, ready to go off this blooming dinner. I can't get there, and I'm thinking about running up through the rain to get to the underground and all the rest of it. And somebody behind me said, "Excuse me, are you Ken Olisa?" And I remember thinking, expletive deleted, and I've dropped my pass as well. So I spin round expecting someone to hand me my pass. And I said, yes. And he said, "I've just graduated from Fitzwilliam College, Cambridge, and I'd like to thank you for the library." And I experienced the buzz, which I spoke about before, on steroids at that moment. So, yes, I'd like to think it was an act of generosity, but gosh, it gives back day in and day out.
Yeah. In terms of what you do philanthropically, that's obviously a hugely significant gift, but you are now a really big champion for smaller charities, and all of the work that you're doing as the Lord Lieutenant of London is a lot of it is around promoting smaller community organisations and small charities. Obviously, that's part of what you're doing when you're supporting us as well. But why do you see small charities as playing such an important role?
Well, again, it's a really interesting topic, this. I've been to meetings where people said, there are 250,000 charities in this country. It's ridiculous. We should drive some mergers. They are generally bankers who say this. Actually, I should be clear here, investment bankers who push that kind of argument. I doubt they've ever met one of these small charities. But when you meet two people whose daughter died of leukemia and they've decided they don't want anybody else to go through the terror and horror that they went through, and so they're determined to do something about it, you've met real charity. It's not a business that's helping people, as it were, as part of their purpose. It's people who get out every day to think about how they can make the world a better place. And I don't want to be negative about large charities. I chaired Shore Trust, 300 million a year turnover. I don't want to be rude about large charities. That's not my point. My point is the real passion for making a difference comes from people wanting to help other people. And that's harder and harder and harder if the institution is large. So I'm an enormous fan of small, underfunded, struggling but passionate charities to try to find ways to help them do better. But I go back to my point about the buzz, which is when you help a small charity get to be much better, everybody gets a buzz. If you give a large amount of money to a large charity, well, it's good to have done that, and there's probably lots of tax benefits and all the rest, but it's not a buzz that you get from talking to someone that says, "Let me tell you how I started this food bank, what I've done with it, how many people we've helped, and your money has made the difference." So there's a very special place in the British system for small charities.
Yeah. I think we see that a lot with the philanthropists that we work with, in that there's something incredibly special when your skills and your expertise is being used alongside your funds. And as a philanthropist, if you can feel like you have used your skill and expertise to select people who are going to be able to have much more of an impact and help them to get to a next level with your support, the buzz is...
Actually, Mary, you make a really good point there. All of your points are really good. I didn't mean to pick that one out, but a really good point. If you just give money, you're doing good. So there's nothing wrong with that. And you probably get a buzz and you get your name up on some kind of plaque or whatever. It's all okay. And you can show your children your name in brass or gold or something on that. But actually, if you give your skills as well, you get much more of a buzz. And the recipients are much more grateful than just getting the money. And I think that human interaction, I guess that's the point of charity, isn't it? It's the human interaction. It's not just donating money to someone. That's what your will is for, if you've got any money left by then. But actually, the real opportunity is to make the difference. And if you're not seeing the difference being made, you're not getting the buzz I'm speaking about.
Yeah. There's such an opportunity now. There's a lot of funds that are being put into donor advised funds. There's a lot more awareness, I think, of from communities where they have been fortunate enough to have resources or create resources that they want to share them. How do you think we can really encourage and inspire people to think differently about philanthropy and to think of it not as just writing the check to the big organisation, but to sort of roll their sleeves up and get involved like you have done, and you've set up the Aletta Foundation. You've got really into problems that you've seen and then got involved in trying to solve them. How can we encourage more people to do that?
I think by just telling them that this is an opportunity, because once you've felt the buzz, it's there forever. I lived and worked in obviously London, then I went off and worked in America, then I worked in Brussels, and then I came back to the UK. And I went to a black-tie dinner on Aldwych one evening, and it was lovely and interesting, and the whole thing was important, and I was back in my home country, and I felt really pleased. And I walked down the road in Aldwych to the hotel I was staying in, and every shop doorway had somebody sleeping in it. And I thought, well, when I left this country 6 years ago, there weren't people sleeping in the shop. What's happened? So I had a rant the next day to my PA, who said, well, homelessness is a problem. She said, but I've got a friend who's in a homeless charity, and if you'd like to do something. I said, damn right, I'd like to do something ridiculous. I mean, this needs to get, blah, blah. She said, well, I'll connect you. So she connected me, and about 3 days later, I get a donation card back from this charity. So I said to my PA, I wanted to do something. I don't want to give a blooming donation. She said, well, look, I'm just the messenger. She said, let me talk to my friend and see what she's got to say. So she talked to her friend, and her friend, being British, said, tell your boss that in this country, when people say they want to do something, they mean they want to make a small donation. If he actually wants to do something, he should come and meet us. So I go to meet Thamesreach, charity I'm still very much involved with, now 30-something years later. I go to Thamesreach, and I go to their building, which is a horrible building, been donated by the Jubilee Line engineers because it was condemned. It was a horrible building, and in the lobby were these poor people and dogs all waiting to try to get advice on housing and so on. And I think, why didn't I just make a small donation? This is not my milieu at all. Anyway, I go to meet the chief executive, and she's in a porter cabin, actually not even a tool store, in the car park of this place. So I go in there. It's quite nice, though. I don't want to overstate this, but I go in there and I sit down, a lady called Beryl, and we start talking about what the charity did, and I'm talking about why I'm interested, and I'm not really interested anymore. In fact, this is definitely not for me. And I said to her, so I already said this, but I'd really like to do something. But I wasn't really as committed as I had been when I was having a rant at my PA. And she said, well, that would be great if you would. We'd love you to join the board. I said, no, what is the problem in this country? I said I'd like to do something. I just want to join the board. And Beryl said, we've got lots of people who do soup runs and etc. She said, but what we don't have in the charity sector, and certainly in our charity, is much or any business experience. And we need that. And if you would join the board, that would help us. I remember thinking, actually, that does sound a little bit easier than going out in the middle of the night with soup kitchens. But I joined the board. I was on the board for a very, very long time. We grew enormously, made a big difference, etc. We brought other business people onto the board as well, but it wasn't a business people's board. We just brought some others on, but we had homeless people, health care people, and so on. So it was a proper board, etc. And Thamesreach did an enormously good job. So I'm going to go back to philanthropy. Giving money is one part of it. Giving treasure, as people like to say, but also giving time and talent are the other two dimensions. And I think if you don't get a buzz out of that, out of really helping, do something else. But if you do get a buzz, there is no better way. Then the question is, where can you best have the impact? Sit on the board of a very large, famous charity? No. It's like sitting on the board of a large company. Work with a small charity that would be so grateful for the contributions, the time and the talent, and obviously the treasure, the money. Then you get the buzz. So it's all about the buzz.
How, in terms of advice on for people who are wanting to get involved in philanthropy, where would you suggest they start? Because I think it's something that can be quite daunting, and people think, oh, well, I haven't got enough to give to make any real difference. So, what can I do? Where can I really have an impact? And obviously anything, even time makes a difference. But what advice would you give to somebody who was thinking, I'd like to start investing some money in social change, and I'm new to this?
I think one of the biggest challenges in philanthropy generally, as you just highlighted in that question, is working out where one should do it, where one should go. Well, I will start with the obvious point, which is it's where you're going to get the bigger buzz. So that's the first point. So where does that high come from? And that comes from your heart and not your head. And that's quite difficult, I think, because when people are thinking about becoming involved with charities, and particularly where money is involved, they tend to think accountants, accountancy, profit and loss, return on investment, etc., etc. And that's a dangerous path to go down, because that buzz doesn't come from the balance sheet. It comes not from your head, but from your heart. So I say to people, the first thing is to think about what's wrong with our world, where you think you can make a difference and where you've got a passion for the way of making a difference. So that's not an opportunity to rant about the government or complain about the potholes or something. It's about saying, well, my uncle died of, and if only they had, then I could have, etc. And that's something where you'll find your heart is driving you rather than your head. Once your heart, and people say to me, Ken, so if you had to choose a charity to get involved with, how would you choose it? And I said, well, I can honestly say there are certain charities that just don't work for me. So people come to me, obviously, and ask me to get involved with things. Let's take a medical charity. Healthcare, medical. I mean, it's really important, but it doesn't do anything for me other than keeping me alive. The minute you talk about social inclusion and social mobility, I find myself interested, and I put things aside and start to focus. So I know where my heart gets the buzz from, and it's from that social mobility, social inclusion, social justice side of the world. So one's got to examine one's heart, I think, is the answer. And having done that, I'm working out across the spectrum what things really do and don't matter. But the question is that simple one: where do I think I can get the best buzz?
Yeah. And obviously, from our perspective, we are big advocates for that buzz is greater when you're working with something that's smaller and when you're closer to the action, basically. And you can really feel like your skills have the opportunity to be useful because, as you say, in a really big charity, it's like being on a board of a really big business if you're great at accountancy. It's not that useful because they'll have a full finance department. But if you know a lot about scaling something or building a business and you're working with a smaller organisation, then that knowledge is going to be really useful.
Well, yes, let's just amplify that a little bit more, if I could, Mary Rose, because actually the word that I should have used in answering your earlier question is impact. What one actually wants is to have impact. If you have impact, that's how you get the best buzz. And it might be surprise, it might be deliberate, but it's when you get that sense of impact. Now, in the charity world, we all now produce impact reports. So somebody a long time ago worked out that actually impact is the point in all of this lot. It remains the point. So thinking about where do I think I can get the best impact? But remember, the impact is then to come back and give the buzz.
Yeah.
So I can give £10 million to make something happen over there. Obviously, well, not obviously, but hopefully it's going to be an impact. But I won't get a buzz. I'll just get a tax certificate. Actually, no, the impact comes when probably somebody just looks you in the face and says thank you, gives you that hug, whatever it happens to be.
I know. I think that's a really good point. As a philanthropist, the impact is the buzz, but you need to see the impact on the ground to be able to get that buzz. Yeah. And finally, with everything that you've learned over the years, both in your public service and in your private sector experience, what is your message to funders about the kind of whole ethos and the spectrum of doing good and, the difference between people who are getting involved and people who are not getting involved?
I think one of the biggest problems that we face in the world is that if you're a nice person, you assume that everybody else is broadly nice. Actually, that's not correct. Some people are amazingly generous and kind, and some people are unbelievably evil and horrible. And I talk about the spectrum of good and evil. It's not my discovery, of course. It's to be found in all great literature and the Bible and a few other places. But there's difference in good and evil. And I once, it didn't go particularly well, so bear with this story, but I spoke at an event in a cathedral on the subject of good and evil. I'm feeling rather pleased with myself. I'd like to think I've got to the stage in life where I can be listened to in a cathedral about such things. And I spoke about a normal distribution on a spectrum from good to evil. And I described the Blanc shape of a normal distribution, the graph. And I said, and so you've basically got half the people on that graph who are naughty to evil on one side, and you've got people on the other side who are nice to saintly on the other side. I said, and leaders by their example, can skew the blancmange one way or the other. And if we can, by doing good, skew the blancmange in the direction of good, then more people will be doing good, and those doing less good will be diluted. Actually, it was a better speech than I've just given you then, and obviously a lot longer. And then when we went for drinks afterwards, I was congratulated by a large number of people on my speech, none of whom seemed to have picked out any of the messages other than the word blancmange. And all they wanted to talk about was when they'd had blancmange at school or their mother or something. Terrible. So I just want another chance at this message, which is there's a normal distribution. And we really ought to try to do everything we can to skew it in the side of good away from the side of evil. And if we can make that happen, then we will have made the world a better place, with or without blancmange.
And what's your take on people who don't do anything, who say, oh, well, there's not really any difference I can make?
Well, they're sad, aren't they? But I know a lot of sad people. First of all, I think engage. Don't be daunted. The world isn't going to be made a better place by people not being brave and being undaunted. But if you think it's about following your heart and not your head, it's about going for that buzz, it's about making the world a better place, it gets to be a lot easier. And there is no downside to helping a charity. I mean, I say to people who want to be a non-executive director, and they say, you've done a lot, Ken. How do you become a non-executive director? Well, I can't remember how it started. It was so long ago. But I say, well, a really good way to start is to become a non-executive director on the board of a charity. I said, the worst thing can happen is you've helped the charity do better, and the best thing can happen is you then find that as a pathway to becoming an NED in the commercial world. So there are all kinds of ways to assist charities. It's not just about money. It is time and talent as well as treasure. But I would encourage anybody who cares about the blancmange to help push it in the right direction.
Yeah. What are you seeing on the ground at the moment as being the real issues that are facing these very high impact smaller charities that are working in communities that made such a difference in COVID and really supported people through the pandemic? What are the challenges that they are facing now?
There's an easy answer to that. Money is the biggest problem. Lack of money, and it's not huge amounts of money. You do as well. We live in a world where £5,000 is life-changing for many of these small charities. I do work where £500 is life-changing for small charities, and people just get on and do amazing things, basically while it's running on empty. So money is a big part of the problem, but I think that's an easy answer. And one has to be careful because money solves all problems. Of course, it doesn't. It is indeed, I believe, the root of all evil. I seem to remember a famous quote from somewhere else. But I think there's a different issue here, which is, and I go back to the point I was mentioning about Thames Reach in my first meeting with the then chief executive, which is commercial skills, being able to compete, as it were, in a marketplace, which is what we're all having to do, is a big gap. And I think that's where business people can help enormously. It's just giving skill. And an example, I was involved with a charity, I have to remain nameless, when we had an employment tribunal and we lost it. We lost it because we'd summarily dismissed two people who'd risked the life of one of our beneficiaries. And as far as we were concerned, that was a reason for instant dismissal, and they were instantly dismissed, and they took us to the tribunal, and we lost. And we lost because we hadn't followed the process to the letter, which, of course, is the point of the employment tribunal. Our chief executive was catatonically depressed by the fact that we had lost. He felt humiliated, and he had to tell the board. And one of my colleagues on the board said, but you're telling me that these two people behaved badly, they risked the life of one of our beneficiaries, and as a result of which they had no redeeming arguments, you fired them summarily. We went to a tribunal. Through that tribunal, we were found not to follow the process properly, and we lost the tribunal. We had to pay them some kind of compensation. And our chief executive shakingly said, yes, that's correct. And the man said, good. We don't want people like that working for us. Well done. And I think the business people aren't worried whether the rule went this way or that way, if the principle was right, if the output was the right one. But if you are in a world where you think it's all about regulation and compliance and so on, and you haven't got any sense of freedom, it's the school rules syndrome, then it gets quite dangerous. So having that collection of skills around that board table can then make sure that the organisation has the chance of coming to the best possible answers, rather than just doing what they thought the Charity Commission rules implied they should be doing. So I think it's just that freedom to act based on the impact, the output, the buzz that you're trying to have to make the world a better place would be my advice.
And I think that you can't underestimate what a difference it will have made to that chief exec, having one of his board turn around and say, well, clearly you did the right thing. And, that is the difference in situations like this, sometimes between burnout of a chief exec and them being able to sleep.
And you're so right. And it comes from that diversity of experience around the board. If everybody's just come through the same experience, they don't have, obviously, that opportunity for the broader thinking. And we live in a world which is full of regulations. And that's a good thing, not a bad thing. But you need to be able to understand the point of the regulation, not just try and follow it. I mean, another irritating thing for me is term limits for trustees of charities. I was having a debate with one of my charities the other day, and I said, well, look, I'd rather we worried about performance, and I'm very happy to terminate non-performing non-executives or trustees immediately. But somebody who's performing, why would I want to lose them? And somebody said, well, because refreshing is a good idea. I said, so is oxygen and a lot of other things, but why would I want to lose them? By the way, your name is now on my list of possibly an early one to go. But the point is, you're trying to have a role. You're trying to have an output. You're trying to get a buzz. You're not just following some kind of formula in Excel. So anyway, the short answer, that was the long answer to your question. The short answer is do the right thing.
Yeah. I think that's incredibly important. And I think it's something that often people who aren't from the charity sector don't realise is valuable to the charity sector. As in, we have conversations with business people who they have no idea quite the impact that their confidence can bring from just being in the room and being the person who is completely open to questioning a regulation or a bill from an accountancy office and saying, that's crazy, they've charged us that much to write that letter. Whereas for the charity, they may not have the confidence to have done that.
You're so right. And I think the whole idea of having diversity around a board applies to all boards.
Yeah.
And it certainly applies in the charity sector. If you just get lots of people who are keen on doing good but haven't brought any other experience, then you're going to get a lot of people who are keen on doing good. But if you've got other experience, you can grow.
Yeah. Because, it can be incredibly powerful when the right combination comes together. So, Ken Olisa, thank you so much indeed. It's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and thank you for all that you're doing for both the for and the charity sector more broadly. And a sincere thank you for listening in. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more about philanthropy and social impact, please do follow, share and subscribe to the Brace for Impact podcast. Listen on all the major platforms or watch the video on our website, thefor.org. Goodbye.